How's it going, everyone? Austin Honecker here. I just wanted to come on here for a while and give them a review for All Elite Wrestling's pay-per-view event Full Gear 4 from last night, which was November 19th, 2022. I gotta say, it was awesome from start to finish. There was a pre-show and a main show. There was the pre-show and the main show. Now, for the pre-show, for the matches, match 1, it was the Best Friends, which are Trent Beretta, Chuck Taylor, Orange Cassidy, Rocky Romero, and Danhausen versus The Factory, which are QT Marshall, Aaron Solo, Nick Comoroto, Cole Carter, and Lee Johnson. That was a great match, but the ending to it, the Best Friends went over cause Danhausen pinned Nick Comoroto with a pump kick. Now after the match, QT Marshall came into the ring and Danhausen pulled out a spike and struck QT Marshall with it and knocked him out, and then the Best Friends, which are Trent Beretta, Chuck Taylor, Orange Cassidy, Rocky Romero, and Danhausen, done the give the people what they want hug and celebrated and everything. That was cool. That was after the match, by the way. Match 2, it was Ricky Starks versus Brian Cage in an AEW title eliminator semifinal match. That was a great match, but the ending to it, Ricky Starks went over and advanced in the AEW title eliminator tournament with the Rochambeau. Now after the match, Ethan Page came up on stage and a stare down between Ricky Starks and Ethan Page ensued and everything. That was cool. That was after the match, by the way. And match 3, which was the main event of the pre-show, it was Eddie Kingston versus Jun Akiyama. That was a great match, but the ending to it, Eddie Kingston went over with the spinning back fist. Now after the match, Ortiz came into the ring and Eddie Kingston and Ortiz embraced with a hug, and Eddie Kingston got on the microphone and cut a promo talking about how it was a dream come true to finally face off against Jun Akiyama, and Eddie Kingston thanked Jun Akiyama for giving him what he wanted, having a match with him, and said that he was the best ever and everything. And Eddie Kingston talked about the matches for the main show of Full Gear and everything, and Eddie Kingston thanked the fans for coming out to Full Gear and everything. That was cool. That was after the match, by the way, and that was match 3 and the main event of the pre-show, by the way. Now, besides the matches, Renee Paquette interviewed Konosuke Takeshita. Well, Renee Paquette brought up about Konosuke Takeshita being all elite and signing with AEW and everything, and Renee Paquette asked Konosuke Takeshita what his plans were what his plans are since he's now a part of the AEW roster and everything, and Konosuke Takeshita talked about how he's moving, how he has moved to America and he's going to fight for AEW forever and everything. That was cool. Renee Paquette interviewed Eddie Kingston. Well, Renee Paquette brought up to Eddie Kingston about his match with Jun Akiyama in the pre-show and everything, and Eddie Kingston talked about how Jun Akiyama was his hero growing up and how it was a dream come true to finally be able to face Jun Akiyama in a match and everything, and Eddie Kingston talked about how he was going to take out Jun Akiyama and beat his ass and everything. That was cool. AEW aired highlights of the AEW video game AEW Fight Forever. That was cool. Which, you know, Renee Paquette interviewing Eddie Kingston was cool too. But that was cool about AEW airing highlights of the AEW Fight Forever video game. That was cool. and the commentary team went over the match card for the main show of AEW Full Gear. That was cool. Now, besides all that, Tony Schiavone, Taz, and Excalibur done commentary throughout the pre-show. They done awesome as usual. And Ethan Page done guest commentary along with Tony Schiavone, Taz, and Excalibur during the match between Ricky Starks versus Brian Cage in an AEW title eliminator semifinal match. Ethan Page done great on guest commentary. And the referees for the pre-show were Mike Posey, Paul Turner, and Bryce Remsburg. Mike Posey refereed the match between the Best Friends versus The Factory. Paul Turner refereed the match between Ricky Starks versus Brian Cage in an AEW title eliminator semifinal match. And Bryce Remsburg refereed the match between Eddie Kingston versus Jun Akiyama. All the referees done awesome as usual. Now, all that was for the pre-show. The pre-show was awesome from start to finish. I really enjoyed that. Now, for the main show. Now, with the main show, it was awesome from start to finish. Now, for the main show, for the matches, match 1, it was Jungle Boy versus Luchasaurus in a steel cage match. That was a great match, but the ending to it, Jungle Boy went over with the snare trap. Match 2, it was the Death Triangle, which are Pac, Rey Fenix, and Pena El Cerro Miedo versus the Elite, which are Kenny Omega, Matt Jackson, and Nick Jackson for the AEW Trios titles. That was a great match, but the ending to it, the Death Triangle went over and retained the AEW Trios titles cause Rey Fenix pinned Kenny Omega with the victory roll. Match 3, it was Jade Cargill versus Nyla Rose for the TBS Women's title. That was a great match, but the ending to it, Jade Cargill went over and retained the TBS Women's title with the Jaded. Match 4, it was Chris Jericho versus Bryan Danielson versus Claudio Castagnoli versus Sammy Guevara in a 4-way match for the Ring of Honor World title. That was a great match, but the ending to it, Chris Jericho went over and retained the Ring of Honor World title cause Chris Jericho pinned Claudio Castagnoli with the Judas Effect. Match 5, it was Soraya versus Brit Baker. That was a great match, but the ending to it, Soraya went over with the lifting DDT. Match 6, it was Samoa Joe versus Powerhouse Hobbs versus Wardlow in a 3-way match for the AEW TNT title. That was a great match, but the ending to it, Samoa Joe went over and won the AEW TNT title because Samoa Joe made Powerhouse Hobbs pass out to the Coquina Clutch. Match 7, it was Sting and Darby Allin versus Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal. That was a great match, but the ending to it, Sting and Darby Allin went over because Darby Allin pinned Jay Lethal with the coffin drop. Now, before the match, as Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal, along with Sanjay Dutt and Satnam Singh, made their entrances, they brought out some face-painted people, and then as Sting and Darby Allin came out, a brawl ensued between Sting and Darby Allin against Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal, along with Sanjay Dutt and Satnam Singh. That was cool. That was before the match, by the way. And that was match 7, by the way. Match 8, it was Jamie Hayter versus Toni Storm for the AEW Interim Women's title. That was a great match, but the ending to it, Jamie Hayter went over and won the AEW Interim Women's title with the ripcord lariat. Match 9, it was the Acclaimed, which are Max Caster and Anthony Bowens versus Swerve in Our Glory, which are Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland for the AEW Tag Team titles. That was a great match, but the ending to it, the Acclaimed went over and retained the AEW Tag Team titles, cause Max Caster pinned Swerve Strickland with a double arm slam sit-out powerbomb combination from Max Caster and Anthony Bowens. Now, before the match, as Swerve in Our Glory came out, then the Acclaimed came out. Max Caster done a rap on Swerve in Our Glory on Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland, and Anthony Bowens said his signature line, Bridgeport, the Acclaimed have arrived, and everything. And then, as Anthony Bowens said his signature line, Billy Gunn came out and tried to attack Swerve Strickland, but Swerve Strickland kicked Billy Gunn in the face, and Billy Gunn tried to go after Swerve Strickland, but all the referees came out and ejected Billy Gunn from ringside before the match started and everything. That was cool. That was before the match, by the way. And that was match 9, by the way. And match 10, which was the main event of the main show, it was MJF versus Jon Moxley for the AEW title. That was a great match, but the ending to it, MJF went over and won the AEW title with a punch in the face with brass knuckles. That was match 10 and the main event of the main show, by the way. Now besides the matches, Tony Schiavone interviewed the Jericho Appreciation Society, which are Chris Jericho and Jake Hager. Well, Tony Schiavone brought up about Chris Jericho picking up the victory in the 4-way match for the Ring of Honor World title and everything. And then Chris Jericho was talking about how he's the Ring of Honor World Champion and how he's not going to surrender the Ring of Honor World title and how he's going to be the Ring of Honor World Champion for a long time and everything. And as Chris Jericho was talking shit, the best friends, which are Orange Cassidy and Dan Housen, appeared, and Orange Cassidy put Chris Jericho in his place, and Chris Jericho was talking about how Orange Cassidy still owes him $77,000 for ruining his suit jacket and everything, and Orange Cassidy was talking about how Chris Jericho wants to challenge every former Ring of Honor champion there is, and Orange Cassidy was saying, I have a former Ring of Honor champion in mind who is a really good friend of mine, and he is none other than Tomohiro Ishii. Tomohiro Ishii wants to challenge you, Chris Jericho, for the Ring of Honor World title and is going to take the Ring of Honor World title from you. Chris Jericho was saying, all right, Orange, you tell Tomohiro Ishii that I accept his challenge this Wednesday on AEW Dynamite, because I am the Ocho, and I will beat Tomohiro Ishii's ass, and I will retain my Ring of Honor World title and everything. And so Chris Jericho ended up leaving, and then Jake Hager was staring down Orange Cassidy, and Jake Hager was talking shit towards Orange Cassidy, and Orange Cassidy said, I know what you're looking at, Jake. Jake Hager asked Orange Cassidy what was in his backpack. Orange Cassidy was saying, Orange Cassidy got the AEW All-Atlantic title out of his backpack, and Orange Cassidy said, "You like looking at it, Jake? Well, since you like looking at it, how about you come and take it from me this week?" Jake Hager said, "I accept." And Orange Cassidy said, "Well, see you this Wednesday. Also, nice hat, by the way." So Orange Cassidy and Dan Housen left, and Jake Hager was getting pissed off and everything. That was cool. Now, besides all that, Taz and Excalibur done commentary throughout the whole main show. They done awesome as usual. Jim Ross done commentary along with Taz and Excalibur during the matches of Jungle Boy versus Luchasaurus in a steel cage match, the Death Triangle versus the Elite for the AEW Trios titles, Jade Cargill versus Nyla Rose for the TBS Women's title, Chris Jericho versus Bryan Danielson versus Claudio Castagnoli versus Sammy Guevara in a four-way match for the Ring of Honor World title, Soraya versus Brit Baker and Samoa Joe versus Powerhouse Hobbs versus Wardlow in a three-way match for the AEW TNT title. Jim Ross done awesome as usual. Tony Schiavone done commentary along with Taz and Excalibur during the matches of Sting and Darby Allin versus Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal, Jamie Hayter versus Tony Storm for the AEW Interim Women's title, The Acclaimed versus Swerve and Our Glory for the AEW Tag Team titles, and MJF versus Jon Moxley for the AEW title. Tony Schiavone done awesome as usual. Don Callis done guest commentary along with Jim Ross, Taz, and Excalibur during the match between the Death Triangle versus the Elite for the AEW Trios titles. Don Callis done great on guest commentary. And Ian Riccaboni done guest commentary along with Jim Ross, Taz, and Excalibur during the match between Chris Jericho versus Claudio Castagnoli versus Bryan Danielson versus Sammy Guevara in a four-way match for the Ring of Honor World title. Ian Riccaboni done great on guest commentary. The referees for the main show were Rick Knox, Paul Turner, Bryce Remsburg, Stephon Smith, and Aubrey Edwards. Bryce Remsburg refereed the match between Jungle Boy versus Luchasaurus in a steel cage match. Rick Knox refereed the match between the Death Triangle versus the Elite for the AEW Trios titles. Aubrey Edwards refereed the match between Jade Cargill versus Nyla Rose for the TBS Women's title. Aubrey Edwards refereed the match between Chris Jericho versus Bryan Danielson versus Claudio Castagnoli versus Sammy Guevara in a four-way match for the Ring of Honor World title. Paul Turner refereed the match between Soraya versus Brit Baker. Rick Knox refereed the match between Samoa Joe versus Powerhouse Hobbs versus Wardlow in a three-way match for the AEW TNT title. Stephon Smith refereed the match between Sting and Darby Allin versus Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal. Paul Turner refereed the match between Jamie Hayter versus Tony Storm for the AEW Interim Women's title. Stephon Smith refereed the match between The Acclaimed versus Swerve in Our Glory for the AEW Tag Team titles. And Bryce Remsburg refereed the match between MJF versus Jon Moxley for the AEW title. All the referees done awesome as usual. Now, the match card that's been announced for All Elite Wrestling's AEW Dynamite Wednesday night so far, it's going to be the Death Triangle, which are Pac, Rey Fenix, and Penta El Cerro Miedo, versus the Elite, which are Kenny Omega, Matt Jackson, and Nick Jackson for the AEW Trios titles in match 2 of the Best of 7 series. Orange Cassidy versus Jake Hager for the AEW All-Atlantic title. Chris Jericho versus Tomohiro Ishii for the Ring of Honor World title. And Ricky Starks versus Ethan Page in an AEW title eliminator final match. So the match card for All Elite Wrestling's AEW Dynamite Wednesday night that's been announced so far looks like it's going to be awesome. I can't wait to see it, and I'm looking forward to it. But anyway, I just wanted to come on here for a while and give them a review for All Elite Wrestling's pay-per-view event Full Gear 4 from last night, which was November 19th, 2022. Like I said, it was awesome from start to finish. And with that being said, my name is Austin Honecker, and I will catch your ass down the road. Peace. Out.